You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 13th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme, G7 foreign ministers gather in Canada, struggling to find common ground with their neighbour to the south. After that, we'll look at an ongoing tumultuous week for stock markets. We'll hear from Marriott about the heritage brands of hospitality, and then...
It's amazing to see across so many markets here at MIPIM the lifestyle opportunities, mixed-use projects, and really thinking about what's the right ingredients that will make a project successful.
Our team at the real estate fair MIPIM checks in with global design and architecture firm Gensler before we turn to what we always turn to on a Thursday, that is the Global Countdown with Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Hola, Fernando.
Hola, Chris. Buenas tardes. Today we look at the increasingly trendy Mexican music charts.
All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. When U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio greets his supposed allies in the Canadian resort of Charlevoix today, the smiles from the other G7 foreign ministers will almost certainly be through gritted teeth. The Trump administration has upended the alliance after all, both through its on-again, off-again relationship with Ukraine and its on-again, off-again decisions on tariffs. Canada's Foreign Minister, Mélanie Joly, has already said she'll be using the meeting to talk tactics with European allies and how to put pressure on the United States. Well, Terry Stiasny, the author and political journalist, joins me right here in the studio. Good afternoon, Terry.
Good afternoon, Chris.
We were just talking before starting this segment about how strange it frankly is that a meeting of G7 of all things, which is meant to be the countries that sort of operate most closely in the world, has to start with the US fending off this discussion about whether it will take over Canada.
Yes, it is completely bizarre. This is not what you expect from a G7 foreign ministers meeting, that the US Secretary of State answering questions has to go in and literally say it is not a meeting about how we're going to take over Canada, and his Canadian counterpart saying that Canada is the canary in the coal mine, that we will not back down, we will not give in to coercion, and that, if the US can do this to us, their closest friend, then nobody is safe, in Mélanie Joly's words. I mean, this is not the kind of conversation you normally expect from people who are, traditional and long-standing allies. So I just think that just gives you a sense of quite how difficult and potentially tricky this meeting is.
It does feel like this is less a G7 and more of a G6 versus 1. I mean, is there anything that they will agree on?
I think it's going to be quite difficult. I mean, on the official agenda, there are big issues like Ukraine, of course, Sudan, the Middle East, the situation in the Indo-Pacific, talking about the security of shipping. Now, there might be some areas where they agree, but I think, trying to get a common statement and a common line, particularly the kind of language that they're going to use in any statement on Ukraine, I think is going to be key. You've had, for instance, the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock saying that unity needs to be achieved and firmly reasserted. David Lammy, British Foreign Secretary, saying there could be instability and insecurity if we do not achieve lasting peace in Ukraine, and talking about Putin's appetite for conflict and chaos. So, very few things. I mean, they might well agree about, the importance of trade flows in the Indo-Pacific, for instance, but, on a lot of issues, the language is going to be very hard to reconcile.
It is getting quite small ball when an entire statement would have to be on the trade flows in the Indo-Pacific. This meeting is also happening at the same time that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is headed to Moscow for talks there. Marco Rubio, to be fair, has maybe positioned himself as the one who got Ukraine back to the table this week. Will that win him some brownie points with other foreign ministers?
I think it's going to very much depend on how Marco Rubio handles this. And I think, as you mentioned in the introduction, how far people see Marco Rubio as being completely aligned with what Donald Trump is saying. And I think people will be looking for any gaps because, particularly at the same time, you have got, the Russians essentially saying in the last few minutes, Putin's aides saying that we don't really want this ceasefire. We think this is just a chance for Ukrainian forces to be able to regroup. And I think, the danger, particularly for Marco Rubio there, is he may try to say, look, that we can come to some form of agreement on what a ceasefire in Ukraine looks like. But that can always very easily be derailed by a sort of a social media post from the president saying something different.
That, and there is this question of whether Europe, whether the other G7 allies even have a say in what is happening between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Do we expect Rubio to sort of be briefing this group on Steve Witkoff and his meetings in Moscow, this talk of a ceasefire, or will he actually be taking some kind of advice from them?
I think it'll be interesting, how they handle it. I mean, certainly what seems to have been going on behind the scenes is that you hear from UK government sources that they are feeding in very closely to the Ukrainians, trying to keep talking to them the whole time, advising them on tactics. So I don't think it is just Ukraine going alone. They are getting a lot of input, certainly from the British and other European countries. And I think there's that same process of dialogue and discussion going on, trying to, talk to Trump and the people in the White House as well at the same time, and saying, Europe really has to have a voice in this, even if they're not formally at the table.
There is also separately from that then this whole discussion about tariffs, which of course has been a key issue between the US and Canada and the US and Europe for that matter. Mélanie Joly has suggested that she is going to try and get Canada and Europe on the same line. Together, together Canada and Europe can pack quite a punch, can't they?
I think they can. I think the difficulty for them in these discussions at the moment is that they are constantly trying to hit a moving target. I mean, we saw, tariffs being imposed on Canada in the morning and taken away in the afternoon. So it's quite hard to know exactly what you're dealing with. But I think, even if the EU isn't prepared to go quite as far as Canada has done in terms of the tariffs it's prepared to put on the US, I think they can agree on a common approach. And I think, the US might actually see the impact of that if their tariffs and this idea of reciprocal tariffs is sustained.
You did touch on the UK as well, and David Lammy. I wonder where he sees himself in all of this, because the UK has tried to position itself as the one that can still kind of talk to Donald Trump and the administration. What kind of role will he play at this G7, kind of caught between allies and the US?
I think it's been very interesting how the British government has positioned itself, Keir Starmer and David Lammy as well. They basically said, look, we are the people that you can both be talking to. And I think in some ways it has actually brought the UK closer to the rest of the EU, which of course it has now left, and having these very regular conversations, discussions with the other big powers within Europe, defence ministers meeting in Paris, for instance, over the last couple of days. But, David Lammy has got very good contacts in the US, and I think that's something that he's certainly trying to keep going as well. I don't know how easy it will be for the UK to be a bridge, but that is certainly what they say that they are trying to do.
Terry Stiasny, author and political journalist, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Anita Riota with today's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Russia claims to have captured a key town in the Kursk region and says it is in the final stages of driving Ukrainian forces from its territory. The military push comes as U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is due to arrive in Moscow for talks aimed at securing a ceasefire in Ukraine. Germany's parliament is holding a special debate to consider constitutional reforms of the country's debt brake. Some in Berlin's parliament hope to agree to hundreds of billions in new spending commitments on defense and infrastructure. The plans are being challenged in German courts as they come before a new parliament has been inaugurated. German elections last month saw extreme parties on the right and left make major gains. And Frédéric Arnault, son of LVMH founder and CEO Bernard Arnault, is set to take over at the helm of the Italian cashmere brand Loro Piana as part of a series of leadership reshuffles at the French fashion conglomerate. Frédéric Arnault, who is one of 5 children, is being viewed by many as the eventual successor to his father at the head of LVMH. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita. And it's time now to get a roundup of some of the day's business stories with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg, reporter. Ewan, you are in Dubai. And, we're going to start with, we have to start with some things out of the U.S. Plenty of talk from Elon Musk, but there's also some hard data that the U.S. government spending is not actually coming down.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, the US Agency for International Development has gone. We learned earlier this week that the Education Department's pushing to terminate half of its more than 4,000 employees. That's the first step towards the Trump administration's promise to dismantle the federal agency. But data out today, hard data, shows that US federal spending rose to a record $603 billion last month. Now, that was $40 billion higher than February of 2024, an increase of 7%. So that's quite a hefty increase in federal spending when you look at the wider picture. Now, Elon Musk has repeatedly claimed that Doge is on track to make $1 trillion worth of savings. He claims his initiative is identifying cuts at a rate of $4 billion a day. But the FT quotes a conservative economic policy expert that Doge savings are so small as not to be identifiable in monthly spending totals. And if you just take a look at some of the things which have been cut, such as USAID, monthly outlay there is revealed to have been halved to just over $226 million. But some of the programs in the US are so huge, the 3% rise we've seen in monthly healthcare spending has cost an additional $5 billion, and a 6% increase in Social Security outlays, another $8 billion. So some of these programs are really big. And the issue for anybody who wants to cut US government spending is that about 3/4 of all federal spending goes on things which are pretty much untouchable. Social Security entitlements, as they call them in the United States, things like Medicaid and Medicare. President Trump has repeatedly said he's not going to cut. You can imagine that would be incredibly politically unpopular. Defense spending is unlikely to be cut anytime soon. Spending on veterans is also protected under the law. And of course, interest payments. The government has an enormous multi-trillion-dollar debt, and that needs servicing every month. So a lot of these costs are still rising, and Elon Musk at the moment cannot touch any of those things. So really interesting to see some of the actual outturn when it comes to these numbers.
And it is striking, as you mentioned there, that government spending is actually going up. But I do wonder if that is a calm before the storm kind of thing. With a lot of the data coming out of the U.S. right now, also inflation data yesterday, inflation went down despite all of the tariff talk. Are investors thinking, this is going to change at some point in the next few months, that this might be the last run of data where Trump hasn't really bitten yet?
Yeah, of course, data does, as you imply, kind of look backwards. So it will be interesting to see how it changes over the next few months. It does seem, though, that a lot of Elon Musk's cuts so far have been a lot of show and not a lot of activity behind the scenes when it comes to the big ticket items. But yeah, certainly, and on tariffs, we've seen worries about disruption to global trade. But at the moment, things haven't really hit the fan. We do know that imports to the United States have been rising very rapidly over the past few months as companies try and get ahead of tariff barriers. So it is causing some disruptions to trade, but at the moment, it isn't quite yet showing through on the data. So I think it'll be fascinating to watch all this over the coming months.
Well, and staying with the U.S., one other aspect, and an interesting dilemma on oil prices.
Yeah, some interesting analysis today, Chris, from the Financial Times on what a $50 oil price would mean for the United States. Back in the middle of January, oil peaked at $82 a barrel. It's currently trading, Brent crude is currently trading at $70 a barrel. So that's good news for US consumers. Demand around the world continues to be slow. And markets are also factoring the possibility of more supply from Russia. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump repeatedly talked about very low gasoline prices, and the administration said that a $50 oil price would suit it fine. But the problem for the United States is that the days when it was a big oil importer, when I were a lad, of course, America was always scouring the world for more supplies. It sucked in all this oil from the world. But that is no longer the world we live in. The United States is by far the world's biggest oil producer now. Saudi Arabia is way down in second place. So, of course, a lower oil price is a very mixed blessing for the United States. And one of the things we know that Donald Trump is keen on doing is cutting the American deficit. And of course, oil exports are very important for the United States. And we know that in some of the trade spats, countries around the world have offered up buying more oil and indeed liquefied natural gas, of which the US exports a great deal as well, as a kind of offering, if you like, to the president. But of course, a lower oil price, quite handy for the companies doing the importing, will be costly for the United States. So I think the question is just where the oil price needs to settle to both please Donald Trump looking out for consumers, but also encourage more production in the United States. So that is a very tricky balance. Interesting to see where that number is.
Tricky balances everywhere at the moment. Ewan Potts of Bloomberg in Dubai, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. To news from the world of hospitality now. Monocle's head of radio, Tom Edwards, recently caught up with Satya Anand, EMEA president of Marriott. This was at the Dubai World Government Summit to discuss the company's growth and the keys for heritage hospitality brands. Tom kicked off by asking Satya about Marriott's priorities and what he's most excited about.
Well, there's a lot to be excited about. First of all, Tom, if you think back, I always recollect the time when we were in COVID, which seems very far away, but was only 3 years off, where 80-90% of our hotels were closed, travel was completely stopped, and today we surpassed 2019 levels by a good margin, which is exciting. So people love to travel, and when you think about the destinations which they want to travel, that is also great because they are looking to go and visit different destinations from the traditional ones. And I think this region offers all of that, whether it's in the Middle East or Africa or in Europe. And as we continue to give them the choices, which is important for our travelers, as you go to more destinations. And one of the places that I'm really excited to see our development grow is in Africa. As an example, in Kenya and the neighboring areas, we have opened our first safari lodge, a tented safari lodge, which we were, obviously in a business that has been around for some time, but the first time we entered that. And that's really exciting because it offers our guests an opportunity to experience something which they would never have. But this region, as you know, is on fire. I mean, if you think about UAE, we have close to 90 hotels in the region and more coming, a dynamic part of the world. And when I think about Saudi Arabia, which is neighboring countries, we have 40 hotels and another 40 in the pipeline. So lots happening in this part of the world.
An incredible pace of development. Just in terms of your role as one of the sort of custodians, if you like, of a storied name in hospitality and as a global corporate, how do you balance that weight of history, those traditions, that heritage of great service, with pushing for innovation? Because I guess sometimes there can be some jeopardy, some tension between moving too fast or changing up things actually that customers they like how it works already. Do you think there is a tension, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. If I look back at the history of the company, we were founded in 1927, so we're going to be soon 100 years. One of the key values of the company, of the 5 values, was embrace change. So this is what our founders, Bill Marriott Sr., did, and he said, we have to be continuing to evolve, and that requires us to do it in multiple ways. Right? How do we operate? What are our brands? How do we get into new markets? But it's also to understand our customers better and their needs. And if I think about the changes that are happening in today's world, and we did a survey last year, about 21,000 people. We did an external survey, and it clearly shows, their interest in travel has changed over time. Certainly after COVID, they want to experience more things than they did before. They are more interested in going to destinations that they had not visited, but they're also looking for companies to provide that quality accommodation and assurance that when they do go there, they will be able to experience a very good quality of service. And those are things that we're working on as we speak and provide our customers those choices.
Lots of narratives this week about digitalization and AI. It's kind of permeated every discussion, sure. Sector by sector, nation state by nation state. What does the digital transformation that's ongoing, AI of course, what does that offer? And are you AI agnostic, skeptic, enthusiast in terms of how that can presumably personalization, big potential. But tell me how you incorporate that into your thinking strategically.
Sure. I mean, let me touch on digital first, and then before we go to AI. Digital is something that is an absolute given in today's world. If you think about how a customer is even thinking of travel and then actually making a booking and then experiencing that, it is a digital journey that they're taking, and more folks will be part of that journey. And so we're gearing up, and we have already done that through our mobile apps and websites and the like, and that's absolutely a given. AI is interesting. Most people think about AI as something that's just happened overnight. The reality is AI has been around for some time. The only difference is we are starting to use it in a different way because of computing power, etc. Now, we've used AI in the past, and now we're starting to use AI a lot more. We primarily see AI as an enabler. We don't see that as a replacement. We believe that it'll aid our customers to be able to make better decisions, be more personalized, which we are doing right now, but we'll be able to do it in a whole different way when I think about the capabilities of AI. I also think about our associates. Today, AI could, in future, as we make these changes, make it so much easier for our associates to be able to take a lot of information, digest it, and give it back to our customer in a jiffy. Yeah. Right now, it takes a lot of time. So those are things I think which will change with AI. But at the heart of it is we are a people business, and it's important to make sure that we continue to do that.
That was Monocle's Tom Edwards speaking with Satya Anand of Marriott in Dubai. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Next here on The Briefing, we are in Cannes as our team reports this week from MIPIM, the global urban festival and the largest event dedicated to real estate and property in the world. Today they are checking in with the global design and architecture firm Gensler. From transforming vacant office buildings into much-needed housing to designing skyscrapers that foster a sense of community, the practice is playing an active role in the cities of tomorrow. Monocle's senior foreign correspondent Carlotta Rebello caught up with Gensler's co-CEO Jordan Goldstein, and she began by asking him about the intersection between public and private in urban life and how that comes across in Gensler's work.
Well, we find ourselves often at the intersection of public and private, and it's sometimes in individual projects, but it's also sometimes in big scale opportunities where it's more than just a particular site. It could be a whole district or part of a city, whether that's in London or whether that's in Dubai or in India. It creates a level of dialogue where we often find that we can play the role of conductors of the symphony, where we're bringing together public players, private developers, and then a whole bunch of constituents, some from the community, some from other organizations that allow a richness to multiple voices being able to craft unique vision.
Now, one thing that is fascinating is the breadth of work that you do, from spanning corporate headquarters, skyscrapers, entertainment venues. Is it difficult to have, obviously each project is different, but a unified design approach that this is a Gensler project when you are working across such a diverse portfolio?
Well, we pride ourselves in there's no specific style. It's really being attuned to the vision of each client. And what's nice about that is we truly listen to what our clients are saying. What is really the kind of business challenge or the opportunity that they see for betterment, and whatever it is, whether it's their business, it's a new development, it's their workplace, it's their new lifestyle district. And then that gives us an opportunity to really start to craft a strategy and a solution that's bespoke to that particular project. And we are really we look at the kind of the opportunities through 4 different lenses: work, lifestyle, community, and health. And the work and workplace, certainly that is ripe for conversation right now, but it's amazing to see across so many markets here at MIPIM the lifestyle opportunities, mixed-use projects, and really thinking about what's the right ingredients that will make a project successful.
It's interesting that you mentioned there, making each project bespoke, because one of the recent works is the Riyadh Bank, for example, that you've been working on. And that is an interesting project because there is, of course, the location to take into consideration consideration the cultural and community aspects of it. So what are some of the considerations you had to take there, considering that urban environment, to deliver the project?
Yeah, it's what I would say is that's a good project example of channeling local and global. So how do you be hyper local and be sensitive to the needs of that particular market and certainly that site and its context? But then how do you bring global resources to the table? So the best talent from around our firm, from our 57 offices around the world, channeling the best talent in also to help fuel it. We also have our research institute. So a lot of people don't know. So at Gensler Research Institute, we channel a lot of research into our everyday projects and really embed it. So that's an example of not just a great project, but it's also an opportunity to think about what is the research that can actually push that solution to a better place, to a higher level.
And it's interesting you mentioned the Research Institute, because I know this characteristic at Gensler of having this research-driven design approach, and we're having then the confluence of the creative side with the data side. How do you ensure that by combining both, that projects remain, innovative but also practical, using the data that you analyze?
Yeah, the Research Institute is really kind of a fabulous setup for us, where we have researchers on staff, but we pair them with practitioners. And every year we put a solicitation out for grants, research grant opportunities from across our firm. And we get hundreds for people that are wanting to investigate something that they see on their project. So they may see and identify an opportunity to make it more than just a project solution, make it something that's actually out there as a larger solution or idea. So then we give the grant, pair them up with researchers, and then we publish the research open on our website for everybody to access.
Something we've covered before when we spoke with some of your colleagues was about Gensler's building conversion tool,
yes,
which has amazing potential. This is particularly with the housing shortages around the world, and this is to transform vacant offices into residential spaces. Tell us a bit more about that tool and perhaps some of the impact you've seen since it's been launched.
So during the COVID years, we had a colleague in our Toronto office who was recognizing that there was going to be a problem in cities around the world. There was going to be these assets that were going to be underutilized. And, he started looking at some of the research we had been doing on repositions. And then he found something interesting, is that normally when we would do a study of a reposition, it could take a while. It could take a couple weeks. So he started to say, maybe there's an algorithm that could do this differently. So, he, working with others in the firm, developed this algorithm that you could apply. And, you could be a developer that has 50 buildings in your portfolio, around the world. And applying this algorithm could rapidly tell you that, of these 50 buildings, that these 20 are ripe for conversion. And especially nowadays, to be able to bring, give new life to old bones. The reposition we've seen in the marketplace today is more than just office to residential. We've seen office to senior living, office to mixed use, and in some markets, we've actually seen residential to office.
That was Gensler's co-CEO, Jordan Goldstein, speaking with Monocle's Carlotta Rebello at MIPIM. This is The Briefing. And finally, Thursdays are something of hallowed ground here on The Briefing, because Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, joins me right here in the studio now for this week's Global Countdown. And Faye, we are headed to Mexico, a country that I feel like you talk about quite a lot. I think you like Mexico, but we haven't done its music for a while.
I do like Mexico, and I haven't been there many times actually, but I admire their culture, and I think it's quite interesting looking at it musically, because Chris, in South America especially in Spanish-speaking South America, Latin America, big artists like Bad Bunny, they dominate the charts. So it's almost like what people listen in Argentina is the same as Ecuador and Peru. And of course, Mexicans are also listening to this, but they have a very strong identity.
I was going to say, is there a bit of a divide between kind of that North American, even though it's Latin American and South America?
Maybe a little bit, but also their artists are starting to kind of slowly go into other countries and becoming more popular, including, of course, the US. I mean, In fact, we're going to start at number 5. They sing regional Mexican music, but they are actually from California. But they sing. So there's a little bit of
crossover.
There's a lot of crossover here, and they are becoming very cool. And I'll tell you why. But let's first listen to Fuerza Regida por esos ojos.
El amor por esos ojos me hice malandro, tú la más buena, la envidia del antro, niña, no me digas que no, que esta noche te hago el amor.
There is something very Mexican. You listen to it, it's like it is from Mexico. You know, I think that's soft power for you.
It's that question, I guess, which way round is this going? Is this Mexico influencing the US and California, or California influencing Mexico?
I think probably the other way, Mexico influencing California a little bit.
Bringing its culture north.
But I did say that Mexican music is going global. So, for example, this band, Fuerza Regida, they were actually performing at Paris Men's Fashion Week in January. So, as I said, they are coming to Europe. They are going to other countries in South America. And it's really good to see that in the world of Mexican music.
It's a positive thing for Mexico. That's what we're saying. What do we have at number 4?
Quite unique tone of voice. Some people think he's got a little bit of a hoarse tone of voice. Did I say this correctly?
Yeah, hoarse, raspy.
Very raspy. And number 4 is the Mexican singer-songwriter Tito WP with Rosones.
Traigo buen respaldo y un chingo de morras conocen mi cama.
I mean, it's not a Rod Stewart kind of raspy.
Not quite.
It's a bit of a different type of raspy, but he's definitely leaning into those R's.
Yes, raspy enough for 2025. And it's interesting, he's the cousin of Peso Pluma. Peso Pluma, I think he's probably the biggest Mexican artist at the moment, although he doesn't have any new music right now. But
I think we feature Peso Pluma on Monocle Radio.
Last time, yes, Peso Pluma. We do have one track by Peso Pluma. But the cousin now is almost as big as Peso Pluma.
Cousin stepping into the limelight, taking over in 2025.
He did write songs for Peso Pluma as well.
Well, now he's stepping in. He doesn't want to write songs for his brother and his cousin anymore.
Exactly.
Number 3, where are we heading here? These are all Mexican tracks, I get the feeling as well, right? There's no sort of outside influence here.
Maybe there is a number 3. It is a Mexican artist, but we're listening to a lot of corridos tumbados, a lot of regional Mexican music. But at number 3, we have a singer that's his type of music, what I just mentioned. But for this song in particular, it is pure reggaeton. So there is also some Mexican artists already doing some reggaeton as well. So again, more crossover.
Caribbean influence, it's all there.
So I think these days, Chris, it's very hard not to be influenced about the world. But this song is very fun. He's only 22. It's more for the dance floor. I mean, look at the name of the track, Loco, Crazy. This is Nathan Vega.
No, y no, no me digas que no. Si yo sé bien que te gustó. Y no, no me digas que no. Si yo sé bien que te gustó. Me dijo tu amiga que tienes el corazón roto. Desde que ando libre me la paso bien loco. Malbaie, no necesito tus polvos. Me prestaron otros y otra vez ando bien coco. Me dijo tu amiga que tienes el corazón roto. Desde que ando libre me la paso bien loco.
And it's funny that Nathan Vega, I was reading an interview he did. He said he was not feeling quite comfortable, performing the song. It's not his usual kind of type of music, but he's doing well.
He's branching out. I have to say, Faye, that had a little bit of a Eurovision feel to it, which does bring me to the fact that Latin America is still trying to launch their own Eurovision. Is Mexico going to be part of that?
I think that would be a great idea. They did. We discussed this, Chris. They tried an American song contest. It didn't quite work. But I guess with Latin America it might be different because we're talking here about different countries. That could work. So maybe, don't worry, the American Song Contest no more, but we need a Latin American Song Contest.
Watch this space. What do we have for number 2? Alemán. Is this German related? Where's the Alemán coming
Honestly, I tried looking. It is German related, but I have no idea why he's called Alemán. All I know is that he's a 35-year-old rapper. His father also loved hip-hop. His father was a former breakdancer.
He just calls himself German. Alemán is German.
You know,
Spanish,
but even in Brazil, like a lot of people call Alemão. I think it's very random. People call them Alemão, but it has no connection with Germany whatsoever. And well, this song is more hip-hop. So actually we're having a lot of different genres here. Reggaeton, the corridos tumbados, traditional from Mexico. It's time for some hip-hop here with Alemán, Te Quería Ver.
Tiré por el Insta, solo le dije hola. Mami, vamos a ver, nos extraña mucho esa cola. Yo te voy a cuidar, aquí cargo una tola. Y pa' comprarte todo tengo un chingo de dólares. Me dicen el patrón, mami, tú eres la patrona. Me pongo belicón, tú te pones belicona. Si quería tenerte de frente en persona, mátame las ganas porque tú eres mi matona. Dame tu mano, los dos juntos volamos. Locos.
I have to say at this point, Fernando, that my American uncle used to always collect rap music in foreign languages. He loved hearing rap in any language that wasn't American. I think he'd like that one.
He would like, that'll be amazing. That'll be a good one for him, I think. Alemán, Te Quería Ver. I mean, write this down. So, okay, so we had hip-hop, corridos tumbados, we had reggaeton.
There is a variety, I'll give you that. Yeah, a variety of influences, styles, but also, as I say, countries, a little bit from the US, a little from the Caribbean. It's a mix.
How about a depressive ballad? Maybe that's what we need.
A ballad.
we were missing a ballad. I mean, it's a funny ballad. I mean, you're going to listen to this. The song is called 7 Dias, and I will understand why it's such a sad song. And it is performed by Gabito Ballesteros, and Tito Double P is back.
Ya no me ves, gastar los billetes pendientes.
Dime qué tienes si no juramos un amor para siempre. Ya no te hagas la que no me quieres, que en esos ojos se ve que aún me quieres. ¿Me entiendes?
A very Mexican-style ballad.
Very dramatic. And it's called 7 Days or Siete Dias because basically the singer's reflecting his lover left for 7 days. So after he was spending...
And came back?
He didn't come back.
Didn't come back. Left for 7 days and stayed away.
There's no happy ending to the story. Well, there is a happy ending because in the end he just move on to the next steps of his life. So, I mean, it's not completely sad. Sometimes these things happen in life. And he was perhaps drinking a little bit too much alcohol. But even that is sorted now.
Well, I'm glad that was sorted for him. And he has a #1 hit in Mexico. Exactly. That is also a happy ending. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riota. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks. And our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Termack. Goodbye and thanks for listening.